Okay, so we had started this tshuva yesterday, and we are the issue that we're debating is does a does a babysitter, does a person who's caring for a senior, do they have liability if something happens to them under their care? So Rav Bloy, the last thing that we had learned is from the Sefer Pischei Choshen, where Rav Bloy was quoted as saying that yes, there is liability, um, that it's based on a Gemara in Bava Metzia, that a person does have liability when he's watching over a baby. And therefore, you are responsible to take care of human beings when they're under your care. So that was where we left it off, and we said we would investigate this a little bit further today. So we want to take a look at that Gemara in Bava Metzia. That's the part that we hadn't seen yet. So we'll go to our trusty Sefaria, Bava Metzia Nun Ches Amud Aleph. We'll just take a quick look. Just bring it up. 58a. Um, okay. A paid bailee does not pay. In other words, if a person is being compensated to watch over something, he doesn't pay if certain items were stolen or lost. Rabbi Yosef Bar Chama raises a contradiction before Rava. We learned in the Mishnah, a paid bailee does not pay. And the Gemara raises a contradiction from a brisa, one who hires a day laborer to watch the red heifer to ensure that it is not disqualified, to watch the child to ensure that he remains ritually pure from birth in order to draw the water mixed with the ashes of the heifer, or to safeguard the seeds for the barley that will be used in the Omer offering, that does not give him wages for Shabbat. Therefore, if the items that the day laborer was entrusted to watch were lost on Shabbos, financial responsibility for the loss on Shabbos is not incumbent upon him, since he is not being paid on that day. So, but if he's being paid by the week, etc., by the month or by the year, so then he is considered a shomer sachar for Shabbos as well. Therefore, if the items were lost on Shabbos, financial responsibility for their loss is incumbent upon him. Is it not that he is liable to pay for the loss he caused, as the list of the items being safeguarded includes consecrated items? So this is a technical discussion, but in the course of that technical discussion, it says that if you've been charged to watch over a tinok, to watch over a child, to make sure that he doesn't become tameh, and the child does become tameh, so then you're going to be liable. So even though it's not a perfect analogy, nonetheless, when you're charged to wash over a human being, you are considered to be liable. So let's take a look at the Makor Baruch, and he'll elaborate further. Biur rayato deita begemara sham, no say sachar eno mishalim behektish, that if you're hired to watch over something that's hektish and they are stolen or lost, you're not going to be liable. In other words, hektish has a different status from regular items that you watch over. Or a minu, and the contradiction is raised that when it comes to the person who's in charge of watching over the items in the temple, hasocher es apoya lishmor es apora aduma, lishmor es atinok, lishmor es azroim, ein nostim lo schar Shabbos, lefichach ein achrayos Shabbos alav. Just what we read, that if the treasurer of the temple hires someone to watch over these items to protect them from becoming tameh, if they become stolen or lost, On Shabbos, since he's not getting paid for the work on Shabbos, he's a shomer chinam, and therefore he's not going to be liable. But if he was hired for the week, hired for the month, for the year, or for 7 years, then he is compensated for his work on Shabbos because it's a package deal. He's being, that's how you get around the problem of not paying. So you're not allowed to pay someone for work on Shabbos. What you do is I'll pay you for the week, and so therefore that's called bahavla'a, and therefore it's permitted. Leficha charchaya Shabbos alav, my lav l'shalem. So harei deyesh chiyuve shmira behektish. Does that not mean that you do have to pay even for watching hektish that gets stolen or lost? Lo lahapsid scharo. No, the Gemara says not necessarily. It could be that you only just don't get your salary, but you don't have to pay for loss. So Amar le hachi Amar Reb Sheshes b'shekano miyado v'chein Amar Rabbi Yochanan b'shekano miyado ad kan lashon haGemara sham. So Reb Sheshes establishes that we're talking about where a kinyan was made to obligate the shomer to a higher level of shmira, but the bottom line is that the Gemara there mentions incidentally that you were hired to watch over a child to prevent the child from becoming tameh, because that's what they used to do. They would have you, in order to prepare the ashes of the para aduma, it had to be done by a person who was totally tohor without any question. So they would raise children in a special courtyard where there is no chance of exposure to tumah. And if for whatever reason you take your eyes off that kid, he runs out to the local grocery store and comes in contact with a sheretz, you blew the whole thing, right? So Harei Sham Iri Betinok. So you see over there, we're talking about a small child. The Imnema De'ein Dine Shmira Ba'adam. And if you're going to tell me that there's no law of responsibility when you're watching over human beings, why would I ever think that a person is liable if something detrimental happens to an adult or a human being under my care? But you see from here that even though the child is not a slave or a worker, but he's just a free human being, al kain yesh bo dinei shmira, he's subject to the laws of protection. Amnam yesh litchos esaraya, the hagamara sha'ala, the mehadin hapasha de'en shmira behektish, the in hachinami, hagamara yachla lishol gam mehad de'en shmira ba'adam, the chadaminayu takat. He says that's not necessarily approved, because at the end of the day, the Gemara maybe could have challenged that and said that, well, you're not liable when you're hired to watch over a human being. And maybe the Gemara didn't answer that because this was all part of a havamina. It's all part of a thinking process that was eventually rejected by the Gemara anyway. V'hateret shel Gemara miyashiv gam kush yazu. V'oda hareze sheyesh shmira ba'adam v'lav dafka be'eved hu atzmo chiddush v'lachein yishlomer da Gemara edifa lahakshos mehadin apashut v'habor shein shmira behektish me'asher lahakshos midin mechuda shein shmira ba'adam. And furthermore, maybe the reason why the Gemara didn't ask that question is because it has a better question. Like, you're not liable for watching over hektish issues. So why should you be liable for any kind of loss of tahara or loss of value that occurs with hektish property or people who are dealing with hektish? So he says, Shuvar isi b'shut shol umeshiv she tziyin elav hapischei choshen sham shemitchila kasav lahavirai mesugi hanal v'dacha kamosha kasavti ayin sham. And I later saw that another sefer, the Shol Umeshiv, also rejects this Gemara as proof that a person is liable for watching over a human being who gets injured or damaged as a result of my negligence. Omnam ikar yisod pischei choshen hu da'afla hashach b'chol aposkim shekasvu d'chol adam hukash lekarka ainu davka hecha sheish bo ktsas avdus kagon eved ivri o afilu poel. He says, however, here's the thing. And by the way, this gets into the issue of workers' comp as well. Am I liable for an employee who gets injured? Right? So, and there's so much to expand upon in this question. He says the shach that we had seen yesterday had said that the only time that I'm liable to watch over a human being that's in my care is if he's my eved. Because remember, that's what the Gemara says, that avadim hukshu karkos, that servants are scripturally connected to real estate. And just like a shomer is not liable for damage caused to real estate under his care, a shomer is not liable for an eved who is injured under his care. And the Shach says you might be able to extend that to an employee, someone who's working for you, but you cannot extend that when you are charged with just providing, you're a caregiver for somebody else. They are not your worker, they are not your slave. The Shach says, Aval ben chorin legamri lo hukush lakarka, that a person who is not your slave or your employee, you're not going to be liable because I'm sorry, you you will be liable. He says the only time you're exempt is if you could say that that person is like real estate that's under your care. And on that basis, the Shach says that if a human being is under your care, you are going to be liable. And I'd like to bring a proof to this from what the Shach writes explicitly. He says the Shulchan Aruch writes, when we say that servants are scripturally connected to real estate, then this was not just for the laws of Shmira. This was also relevant for other laws where real estate is different from chattel. And the example that we gave yesterday is when it comes to overcharging or underpaying. Just like with real estate, if I offer you $1 million on a property that's worth $3 million and you accept it, and then afterwards you find out that you undercharged real estate, you have no legal recourse in halacha because real estate is not subject to the laws of onah. Okay? So remember, we learned that yesterday. And the same thing, therefore, is true with avadim. If you hire an eved, you purchase an eved and you pay the person selling the eved far less than the eved's value, you're not subject to the laws of onah because an eved is like real estate. What about hiring employees? So if I hire an employee and I offer to pay him $10 an hour for his labor, when minimum wage is X, is let's say $15. What is minimum wage? $16.50. Okay, and I pay him only $10 an hour. I'm probably in violation of Dina de Malchusa, and he has legal recourse against me for that. But let's put that aside. Let's forget about legal minimum wage. Let's say the type of labor that he's doing would normally fetch $20 an hour, and I'm only paying him $10 an hour. So I may be a bad person, but he cannot sue me in Beis Din for ona'ah, for underpaying for his services, because human beings who are acting in a form of servitude, like an employee, are not subject to the laws of ona'ah. So and this is brought down in the Shulchan Aruch. Because of al zeh hashach sham, the afal gav the hapasuk v'hisnachaltem medaber al avodim kenanim mikol makom zeh shehasacher nafsho kepoil shem eved olav. And the Shach explains that even though the guy that I'm hiring is not an Eved Kanani, he's a Yid, but nonetheless, the fact that he's under my employ gives him the title of Eved, at least for the period of time that he's working for me. And therefore, he's scripturally connected to real estate. Kain Kasav Hasma, B'chein Kasav B'shuvas Reed Lebeis Levi, Behevi Divrei Trumas Hadesh, and Shekasav Kain Adkan Devarav. So that's the Shach. But then he writes, the Kasha, the Harei Hevein Le'el Shach Sbir Le Shekol Adam Hukash Lakarka. But doesn't the Shach say that even without that argument, every human being is connected to Karka? So Elanira Mizeh Kamo Shekasafti Le'el, the Dafka Adam Shuhu Eved Ivri Al Kol Panim Poel, Azamrinan De'ein Shmira Ba'adam, De'ein Din Shmira Ba'adam. He says, you see from here that even though the Shach is more liberal with this law and says that every human being is like an Eved, but that's only if he's under my employ at least. Aval ben chorin legamri, but if a human being is not under my employ, but I've been hired just to watch over them, so then kagon lishmor al isha mevugeret uchidoma. Let's say I've been assigned to watch over an elderly lady. I am going to be liable for the laws of shmira. Val pizeh nir levar mashakasav hamishna lamelech. Shekasav b'das harambam delav dafka avodim hukshel karkos ela kol adam. Even though the Mishnah Hamelech disagrees with that, and he writes that all human beings are like avodim in the sense, and he brings the Rambam, that when you hire someone to work for you, you're not subject to the laws of onah. But I would argue, says the Makor Baruch, that even the Mishnah Lamelech, who says that all human beings are connected to avodim, only refers to employees that are working for you. Shuvra isi betumim shekvar kosav kechol hanal ayin sham v'dog. But Vili says v'lichora das Rashi eina kein. But apparently Rashi does not hold this way. Ela dechol adam hukash lekarkav afilu ben chorin gomer. Rashi seems to be of the opinion that even if a person is not my employee, he still is like real estate, and therefore I'm not going to be liable for shmira. And he goes into this proof, but it doesn't. We won't go into that now. He says, "But mikol makom nira lahalacha, the das harambam v'hashulchan aruch lechalek bazeh, the dafka poil hukash le'eved avalo ben chorin gomer ch'moshe kasav hatum min sham." He says, but the Rambam, at least in the Shulchan Aruch paskin, that there is a difference between whether someone's my employee or whether someone is just a regular human being who is not under my employ. And therefore, that's how we paskin. And a person could never get out of that by saying, I paskin like Rashi, once you have the Shulchan Aruch come out with a definitive psak halacha. Bottom line is that what we're coming out with is that, which is also quite surprising, there's no such halacha of as long as I have been acting responsibly as an employer, that I haven't exposed in any negligent way my employee to harm. If my employee gets injured, just he slips and he falls in the warehouse, let's say, but not because there was any negligence, there was no exposed danger, but he just happened to injure themselves. Because they're under my employ, I'm not liable to protect them from damage, like I would be if an object was under my protection. Just because a person comes onto my premises does not make me liable. If, however, a person injures themselves because there's something dangerous in the warehouse that would cause them damage, it could be that I would be liable because I've left out, because I've, like the Gemara talks about different types of damage. When I leave a bore, I leave something open, a gaping hole open, and I invite someone onto my property, then I will be liable for causing damage to them. That would be like the nezek of bore. I will be liable. But if I haven't set up any bore, then I'm not going to be liable, which is quite interesting because that's not the way secular law would look at it. It would say that, workers' comp, doesn't it extend to any kind of damage that an employee incurs at the workplace? Even if there was no negligence, even if there was nothing dangerous.
One of my employees walking in the parking lot, slipped and fell.
Right. So secular law gives more protection to the employee, it would seem, than halacha. But that's as far as an employee is concerned. But as far as someone who's under my care because I've been hired to watch them, so then the psak of the Shulchan Aruch is there is liability. Um, it could be, even if it's less than negligence, that I would still be liable. He doesn't get into the degree of negligence that's necessary, but obviously there has to be some contribution towards that person's injury in order for me to be liable. Now, let's talk, let me just see. And therefore, if a person was either volunteering, even if he's a shomer chinam, but he was assigned and accepted the responsibility to watch over another human being, and then through his turning his back, that human being was injured, which was the shaila here. I volunteered to watch over the old lady. I turned my back for a few minutes. She fell off the bed and broke her leg. Then I do have to pay for damages. Now, the Makor Baruch finishes with this other footnote, and he says, "V'hainu davka b'tashlume nezek." That's only to pay for the damage itself of the broken leg. Aval hashomer poter midalad dvarim. But a shomer, because he's not considered a mazik, he's just considered to be negligent in his shmira, is not liable for the other things that a mazik normally has to pay for, which is sheves, ripoy, right, boshes, and what's the fourth one? In other words, and ripoy. No, that's ripoy. We said. So sheves is the time off that he can't work. Ripoy is his medical expenses. Boshes is his pain and tsar and boshes, pain and suffering. The dafka adam hamazik chayiv b'dal dvarim below shomer v'chein kosav apischei choshen. Now ulefiza nira ma shechiv Rabbeinu Hagona machaber shlita b'nidon didan l'shalem al hanezek sheisha shibra esragla. So therefore, even though the psaka of Rav Sharaga is that the woman volunteer will have to pay for damages for this elderly lady's broken leg, anu dafka ba'ofen shehaya nezek she'ein sofo leherapeh. That's only for damage that is irreparable damage, meaning that the leg will not heal properly. Ki benezek shesofo leherapeh, because any kind of damage that I cause to someone that will completely heal, ein ze nezek ela shevet. That's not considered nezek. That's just called sheves that I have to pay for their time away from work. As the Shulchan Aruch writes, Yikahu al yado vitzavsa v'sofa lachzor, that if I strike a person's hand and it gets all swollen, and therefore, but it's eventually going to heal, ohiko al eno umarda v'sofa lachzor, or if I punch a guy in the eye and it gets all puffy, but it's eventually going to heal, ein kan nezek v'nosein lo shar arba dvarim. That's not permanent. Any damage that's not permanent, I don't have to pay nezek for. I just have to pay for sheves, ripoy, tsar, and boshes. The harei shomer eno chayv bedal dvarim kamo shekasafti lael v'lachen hashomer yiyah poter b'chei gavna. Shomer therefore will be poter if it's only a temporary damage but not a permanent damage. I do believe that there's a lot more to discuss in this tshuva. I want to know more about workers' comp and the level of liability to my employees. But I hope that maybe somewhere later in the Sefer, Rav Sharaga will devote a series or at least one tshuva to that question of what's my liability for an employee. And I would want to know, does it make a difference if it's just a simple slip and fall in the parking lot? And will that differ from a situation where, let's say, there was dangerous machinery and I didn't make sure that the employees took the proper precautions to protect themselves? Okay. Yeah, or carpal tunnel. Yeah.
Or hearing loud
Because of the machinery. Interesting. Well, the hearing, do you provide earplugs or?
Well, that is a situation where older fellow who went through the Holocaust, he had some hearing issues. in the war.
Yeah.
And so we always had something there, and maybe got a little amplified in the workplace. So the question was, with conversation were very awkward situations. So,
Wow. I mean, I would imagine that an employee, if you have a situation like that, if I was the lawyer, I would say, make sure you have your employee sign a contract waiving liability for, let's say, issues of hearing loss, and offer them earplugs or headphones. And if they decline to accept them, then they assume liability for any hearing loss. If they're working in a place where there's loud machinery. I don't know. I don't know what to. I think we're. I don't know if Marv is here today, but yeah. Yeah, and I believe, yeah, I totally hear you. And the protections that are offered to employees in, let's say, Canada, are much higher protections than are offered by halacha, which is either a good thing or it's not a good thing, depending upon whether you're the employer or the employee. Because sometimes a guy running a business does everything that he can to keep the workplace safe, but still accidents happen. They always happen, right?
I think it was, badge of Workers Club, and they've actually been a couple of employees.
Oh yeah. Okay, we'll continue. We'll do a new tshuva Mirz Hashem tomorrow. Okay, have a great day. Sorry I was a little bit late today.